Hi everyone, for this week's discussion we're supposed to take an amendment or a section of an amendment from the Bill of Rights, and the one I've chosen doesn't contain ideas as lofty as the right to free exercise of religion or of assembly, and it's not as controversial as, say, the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms. It's the Third Amendment, and it reads this way: "No soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war except in a manner prescribed by law." And that's fairly straightforward. There's not a lot of ambiguity to it. And in American history, there haven't been a lot of court cases that deal with the Third Amendment. There are a few that mention it, such as Griswold versus Connecticut in 1965. And in 2013, the Mitchell family sued the city of Henderson, saying their Third Amendment right had been violated. However, most of the times where the Third Amendment is kind of the central issue of the court case, it's thrown out. There just haven't been a lot of infringements on this right. So why is it in there? Why is it included in the Bill of Rights? To understand it, we really have to go back to the French and Indian War. When British troops were in the colonies, their housing was atrocious often, and to rectify this, British officers sought better housing from the colonists. They wanted perhaps public buildings to stay in. But in places like Albany, they didn't get that. And in order to provide housing for their troops, the British officers forced homeowners to take in soldiers. And this left a bad taste in the colonists' mouth. And with the British soldiers remaining in the colonies after the French and Indian War, the issue of housing continued to be present. And when the Intolerable Acts were passed, one of them was the Quartering Act, which required the colonies to provide housing to soldiers. Now, this didn't have to be in homes. It could have been in barracks. But if there weren't barracks in place, then the specter of soldiers being quartered in homes loomed over the colonies. And in the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson notes a couple times that the king had kept soldiers among the colonies in time of peace without the consent of the legislature, and large bodies of armed troops were quartered among us, he writes. So this issue was very important for the colonists, and it makes sense why they would include it in the Third Amendment, because they feared that a larger American government would try to force soldiers on homeowners. But it hasn't been an experience since then. We haven't dealt with it very often. And so the question remains, is this really a great amendment? Is this really something we should concern ourselves with? And I think the answer is yes. And that's primarily for two reasons. First, it protects property rights. There's nothing more central to property ownership than one's house. It's where you keep your stuff. It's where you live. It's where your life often is. It's where you get to relax. It's where you get to rule, basically. And so if a soldier can come in and take it with no questions asked, then there is no protection of property or of privacy. And the second thing that the amendment does is it separates the civil life from the military life. It doesn't allow the military to kind of loom over the people. They're supposed to be separate. And in this way, I think the Third Amendment, while we don't have a lot of instances where it's infringed on, I still think it's important, and we should be thankful that it's there, because we're not a military state. Thank you for listening.